Digital Foundation's Isabella Romano never imagined that a simple frustration would transform her life. 5 years ago, while struggling to book a decent hotel room through clunky reservation systems, she'd sketched her first app design on a coffee shop napkin. That sketch became Luke's Connect, a platform that revolutionized how exclusive resorts manage their high-end clientele. The app's success was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 years, Isabella had expanded from software into actual hospitality, purchasing her first struggling boutique resort in the mountains of Colorado. She applied the same innovative thinking that made her app successful, transforming the property into a destination that perfectly anticipated guests' needs before they even arrived. Marcus had been there from the beginning, offering legal advice and connections from his corporate law background. He'd been charming then, celebrating her victories as if they were his own. Their wedding 3 years ago felt like a partnership of equals, two ambitious people building something beautiful together. But success changed things in ways Isabella hadn't anticipated. As Luke's Connect grew into a network of 12 exclusive properties across 3 states, Marcus became increasingly restless. He'd left his law practice to become what he called a lifestyle consultant, writing travel blogs and building a social media presence that relied heavily on their luxury properties. Isabella watched him pose for countless photos at her resorts, crafting captions that positioned him as the visionary behind their empire. "Another incredible evening at our latest acquisition," he'd write, standing on a balcony overlooking mountains that Isabella had personally scouted, purchased, and redesigned. The comments always praised his taste, his vision, his business acumen. Isabella noticed he rarely corrected the misconceptions. Their conversations became strained, filled with his suggestions for improving properties he didn't understand, and complaints about how the business side was consuming her time. When she tried to share her excitement over a new acquisition or a breakthrough in guest satisfaction metrics, his eyes would glaze over with barely concealed resentment. "You know, Izzy," he'd said last month over dinner at their Denver home, "sometimes I wonder if you remember that this started as our dream, not just yours." Isabella had looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing architectural plans for their newest property in Montana. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was the one who dreamed it, designed it, and built it, while Marcus had contributed initial legal paperwork and endless photo opportunities. "Of course I remember," she'd replied quietly, closing the tablet. "I remember everything." What she remembered most clearly was how alone she'd begun to feel in her own marriage, watching the man she'd loved become a stranger who resented her success while simultaneously capitalizing on it. She remembered the exact moment she'd realized that Marcus saw her achievements not as something to celebrate, but as something that diminished him. Isabella had built an empire on anticipating needs and exceeding expectations. But she'd never anticipated that her greatest threat wouldn't be market competition or economic downturns. It would be the man sharing her bed, who'd forgotten that she was the architect of everything he claimed as his own. Hidden connections. Marcus discovered Arya Chun the way he discovered most things that fed his ego, through the validation of strangers on social media. Her Instagram account at Arya Wonders showcased a carefully curated life of designer luggage, first-class lounges, and breathtaking destinations that made his own travel content feel amateur by comparison. When she commented on one of his posts from Isabella's Aspen property, "Absolutely stunning. The attention to detail is incredible," Marcus felt that familiar rush of being noticed by someone who understood luxury the way he believed he did. Their direct message exchange began innocently enough. Arya was building her influencer brand and seemed genuinely interested in his insights about exclusive destinations. She had that rare combination of beauty and ambition that reminded Marcus of Isabella in their early days, before business had consumed her attention and made her distant. "I love how you capture the soul of these places," Aria wrote after their third week of conversations. Most travel influencers just show surface glamour, but you understand the deeper experience. Marcus found himself spending hours crafting responses, sharing stories about properties that Isabella had conceptualized and developed, presenting them as collaborative visions. Aria's enthusiasm felt like oxygen to his suffocated ego. Their first meeting happened at an art gallery opening in Denver, an event Marcus attended alone while Isabella was conducting site visits in Montana. Aria was even more striking in person, petite, but commanding, with an infectious laugh that drew people into her orbit. She wore a vintage Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. "Finally," she said when she approached a near abstract sculpture, the man behind those incredible properties. Marcus didn't correct her assumption. Instead, he found himself elaborating on it, describing the vision behind each resort acquisition as if he'd been the primary decision-maker. Aria listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that made him feel brilliant and important in ways he hadn't experienced in months. The affair began 2 weeks later. Marcus told himself it wasn't planned, but he'd been fantasizing about it since their gallery encounter. When Aria mentioned feeling overwhelmed by work and needing a retreat, he offered what felt like the perfect solution. "I know exactly the place," he said during one of their clandestine coffee meetings. "Absolutely private, incredibly exclusive. The kind of place where we could disappear completely." He'd chosen Whispering Pines Resort in Montana's Glacier National Park region, a property he'd discovered through his research into competing luxury destinations. The website showcased stunning architecture integrated seamlessly into wilderness landscape, with private cabins that promised complete isolation. Perfect for a romantic getaway that needed to remain secret. What Marcus didn't know was that Whispering Pines had been Isabella's most personal project, purchased through a complex network of shell companies she'd established to protect her privacy. She'd spent 18 months personally overseeing every detail, from the locally sourced stone facades to the custom furniture crafted by Montana artisans. 3 days, Marcus promised Aria as they planned their escape. No phones, no distractions. Just us and the mountains. He booked the resort's most expensive cabin under an assumed name, using a credit card Isabella never monitored. The irony of using her money to fund his betrayal never occurred to him. He was too intoxicated by the prospect of playing the role. He'd always wanted the sophisticated man of the world, generous with luxury and attention. Aria's excitement was infectious. She posted a cryptic Instagram story showing designer luggage with the caption, "Adventure Calls," accompanied by heart emojis that made Marcus feel like the protagonist of his own romantic movie dot as their departure date approached. Marcus felt more alive than he had in years. He was reclaiming something he'd lost, proving to himself that he could still inspire passion and admiration. Isabella was so consumed with her business expansion that she barely noticed his distraction. But Isabella, Romano hadn't built a hospitality empire by failing to notice details. And some details, once noticed, changed everything. Silent surveillance Isabella first noticed the discrepancy on a Tuesday morning while reviewing monthly reports over coffee in her home office. Her assistant, David, had flagged an unusual booking at Whispering Pines, a last-minute reservation for their premium Aurora cabin under the name Blake, paid with a credit card that showed up in their system as belonging to a family account. Her family account. Isabella stared at the screen for several long moments, her coffee growing cold. As the implications crystallized, Marcus had used their shared emergency credit card one she'd forgotten existed to book a 3-day stay at her most secluded property he didn't know she owned. Her first instinct was confrontation, but Isabella had learned long ago that information was more valuable than immediate satisfaction. Instead, she called David. "I need you to pull everything on the Blake reservation at Whispering Pines," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Guest preferences, special requests, anything unusual about the booking." "Already ahead of you," David replied. Isabella could hear typing in the background. "The reservation was made for 2 guests, but only one name is listed. They requested our complete privacy package, no housekeeping during the stay. Groceries pre-stocked, staff to maintain minimal visibility. The privacy package." The same one Isabella had designed for celebrities and high-profile executives who needed absolute discretion. Marcus was using her own innovation to hide his affair. "There's something else," David continued. "The guests submitted special dietary requests that don't match your husband's profile at all. Someone who's vegetarian and allergic to shellfish." The system flagged it as inconsistent with previous stays. Isabella closed her eyes. Marcus was a dedicated carnivore who ordered lobster whenever available. Someone else was joining him, someone whose preferences he was thoughtful enough to accommodate. "David, I need you to book me the Starlight Suite for the same dates. Use the Elena Vasquez alias and make sure the booking appears completely unrelated." Elena Vasquez was one of several identities Isabella maintained for site visits where she wanted to observe operations without staff recognition. She'd learned early in her career that authentic service standards only emerged when employees didn't know the owner was watching. "Of course. Should I alert the Whispering Pines management team about your visit?" "Absolutely not. This is a standard quality assessment. I want normal operations, nothing special." That wasn't entirely true, but Isabella couldn't reveal her real intentions without exposing a vulnerability she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Even to David. Over the next 3 days, Isabella made preparations with the same methodical precision she applied to business acquisitions. She studied the resort's layout, reviewing camera placement and staff schedules. Whispering Pines had been designed with privacy in mind, but Isabella knew every sightline and blind spot because she'd personally approved the architectural plans. She also did something she'd never done before. She activated the resort's comprehensive monitoring system. Officially, the system existed for security and quality assurance. High-end resorts needed to protect guests from paparazzi and ensure service standards met expectations. But the technology could also document everything that happened on the property, from dining conversations to poolside interactions. Isabella told herself she was protecting her business interests. If Marcus was conducting an affair at her own resort, she needed evidence for divorce proceedings to safeguard her assets. But deeper down, she knew this was about something more primal, the need to see exactly how her husband chose to betray her. The night before Marcus's departure, Isabella watched him pack with new eyes. He folded clothes she'd never seen him wear, expensive casual pieces that suggested he'd been shopping without mentioning it. He hummed while selecting cologne, displaying a contentment that had been absent from their marriage for months. "Business trip?" she asked from their bedroom doorway. "Just a few days in Colorado, checking out some potential investment opportunities," Marcus replied without looking up. The lie came so easily that Isabella wondered how long he'd been practicing deception. "Which area?" "Nothing specific yet. Just driving around, getting a feel for different markets." Isabella nodded and wished him a safe trip, kissing his cheek with the same affection she'd shown for 3 years. But inside, she was already calculating distances and timing, planning her arrival at Whispering Pines to ensure maximum strategic advantage. Marcus had forgotten that successful entrepreneurs never entered negotiations without complete information. Was about to learn that lesson in the most personal way possible. The revelation Isabella arrived at Whispering Pines 90 minutes after Marcus and his companion checked in. From her suite's panoramic windows, she watched them explore the property with the giddy excitement of lovers sharing a secret world. The woman was younger than Isabella had expected, petite and animated, with an Instagram-ready aesthetic that made every moment look like a curated photo shoot. Through carefully positioned monitoring, Isabella observed their first evening. Marcus played the role of gracious host, explaining architectural details he'd learned from our business dinners and sharing stories about the resort's development philosophy, as if he'd been intimately involved in its creation. The woman Aria, Isabella learned from their recorded conversations, hung on every word with flattering attention. "You have such incredible taste," Aria told Marcus over candlelit dinner on their cabin's private deck. "I can see your vision in every detail of this place." Isabella watched from her suite's balcony through high-powered binoculars, feeling oddly detached from the scene below. This wasn't her husband of 3 years. This was a stranger performing a version of himself that had never existed. The Marcus she'd married had been supportive, but never visionary, hopeful, but never innovative. Yet here he was, accepting credit for Isabella's most personal creative achievement. By the second day, Isabella had documented everything. Marcus showing Aria the handcrafted stone fireplace that Isabella had personally selected from a Montana quarry. Marcus explaining the resort's sustainable energy systems that Isabella had spent months researching and implementing. Marcus taking credit for staff training protocols that Isabella had developed based on her hospitality technology background. But the final straw came during their last afternoon, when Isabella overheard Marcus on the phone with what sounded like a business contact. "I'm actually scouting this property for potential expansion," he said, standing on the cabin's deck while Aria napped inside. "It's exactly the kind of vision I've been developing. High-end wilderness luxury with modern amenities. I think we could replicate this model in several markets." He was discussing her resort, her design, her business model, as if it were his concept to franchise. That evening, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. Whispering Pines hosted a weekly Starlight Experience, an exclusive outdoor dinner event featuring local cuisine and live acoustic music under the Montana sky. Only 12 guests could attend, making it the resort's most coveted reservation. Isabella had designed the event to create magical moments that guests would remember forever. Tonight, she would ensure Marcus remembered it for entirely different reasons. Using her owner access, Isabella arranged for the evening's presentation system to be modified. Instead of the usual slideshow featuring local wildlife and landscape photography, she uploaded a different kind of visual story. The dinner began perfectly. Marcus and Aria sat at a candlelit table near the performance area, both dressed elegantly for what Marcus had promised would be an unforgettable final evening. Isabella positioned herself at a corner table, her hair styled differently and wearing glasses she didn't normally need, effectively invisible among the other sophisticated diners. As dessert was served, the evening's presentation began. The large outdoor screen illuminated with stunning mountain vistas, exactly as planned. But then the images shifted. Security footage from the past 2 days appeared on the screen. Marcus and Aria exploring the resort. Marcus gesturing expansively while explaining features he'd never designed. Marcus on the phone discussing expansion plans for a business he'd never built. The other diners initially seemed confused then, progressively more uncomfortable as they realized they were watching surveillance footage of fellow guests. But Isabella wasn't finished. The final sequence showed Marcus's phone calls and recorded conversations, with subtitles displaying his claims about ownership and creative vision. The screen split to show property development documents with Isabella's signature, acquisition, records bearing her name, and architectural plans covered in her handwriting. A collective gasp rippled through the dinner party as understanding dawned. Isabella stood slowly, removing her glasses and letting her hair fall naturally. In the flickering candlelight, wearing a midnight blue dress that commanded attention. She looked every inch the resort mogul she actually was. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent gathering, "I believe there's been some confusion about tonight's presentation." Marcus had gone completely pale, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. Arya looked between the screen and Isabella with growing horror as she connected the dots. "You see," Isabella continued, walking gracefully toward their table, "this is my resort. These are my architectural plans, my business innovations, my creative vision. I think there may have been some miscommunication about who deserves credit for what you've experienced here." She reached their table and placed a manila envelope beside Marcus's dessert plate. "Divorce papers," she said quietly, her voice gentle, but unmistakably final. "I thought you might want to review them in the morning, once you've had time to reflect on ownership and truth." Without another word, Isabella walked back through the stunned dinner party, disappearing into the Montana. Darkness like the mountain mist that would roll in before dawn. New Horizons, the story broke 3 weeks later, not through traditional media, but through the modern mythology of social media. A Whispering Pines server had discreetly filmed Isabella's revelation on their phone, and the footage spread across platforms like wildfire. Within 48 hours, #Mountain Justice was trending globally, with millions of views and thousands of comments praising Isabella's ice-cold elegance. Isabella watched the phenomenon unfold from her Denver office, with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. She'd built her career on creating exclusive private experiences, yet suddenly found herself the subject of worldwide fascination. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from major networks, book deal proposals, and speaking engagement offers. More surprisingly, her business flourished in ways she'd never anticipated. Reservations at all 12 Luke's Connect properties surged, with booking agents reporting that guests specifically requested the Isabella Romano experience. Women's groups organized retreats at her resorts, celebrating what they called reclaiming your power. Her occupancy rates hit record highs. "It's fascinating," David observed during their weekly strategy meeting. "You've accidentally created a brand around authentic ownership and calling out imposters. The hospitality industry is buzzing about it." Isabella had been reluctant to capitalize on her personal drama, but the business implications were undeniable. She authorized a carefully crafted media strategy that focused on her entrepreneurial journey rather than the divorce details. Positioning herself as an innovator who transformed hospitality through technology and authentic service. Marcus, meanwhile, had effectively disappeared from public life. His lifestyle blog went silent after posting a brief, lawyer-drafted statement about personal matters requiring privacy. Isabella heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to his brother's place in Phoenix, apparently attempting to rebuild his legal career from scratch. Arya's response had been more dramatic. She'd initially tried to spin the incident as an attack on her character, posting tearful Instagram videos about being victimized by a vindictive ex-wife. But public sentiment overwhelmingly favored Isabella, and Arya's follower count plummeted as brands distanced themselves from the controversy. She eventually deleted her social media presence entirely. The divorce proceedings concluded with surprising speed. Marcus's legal team had apparently advised him that contesting Isabella's asset claims would only generate more negative publicity. He received a modest settlement, enough to restart his career, but nowhere near the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to through Isabella's success. 6 months after that night in Montana, Isabella stood in the lobby of her newest acquisition, a historic chateau in France's Loire Valley that she was converting into Luke's Connect's first European property. The renovation would take 18 months, but Isabella found herself energized by the creative challenge in ways she hadn't experienced since her early startup days. Madame Romano, her French project manager, approached with architectural plans. The stone restoration specialists are ready for your final approval on the courtyard design." Isabella smiled, remembering how Marcus used to interrupt her during similar conversations, offering unsolicited opinions about decisions he didn't understand. Now she could focus completely on the creative process, collaborating with artisans who respected her vision rather than competed with it. That evening, she sat alone on the chateau's terrace, overlooking vineyards that stretched to the horizon. Her tablet displayed reservation charts showing booking patterns across all her properties. Business was thriving, her team was expanding, and she had creative projects that excited her for years to come. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw your interview in Forbes. Proud of how you've handled everything. You deserve all the success coming your way. A friend from Colorado." Isabella smiled, recognizing Aria's writing style despite the anonymous approach. Perhaps everyone was finding their way toward something better. As sunset painted the French countryside in golden hues, Isabella opened her laptop and began sketching ideas for her next venture, a hospitality training program for women entrepreneurs. She discovered that her greatest competitive advantage wasn't just creating luxury experiences. It was understanding that authentic success couldn't be borrowed, performed, or stolen. It had to be built, one thoughtful decision at a time, by someone willing to own both the vision and the work required to make it real. The chateau's ancient stones seemed to whisper agreement as Isabella Romano continued building the empire that had always been hers alone.